welcome to Jurassic Park 3 Minute. We'll be discussing the second Jurassic Park sequel, 1 minute at a time. I'm Brad.
I'm Dave.
And on today's episode, we're back to discuss minute 37 of Jurassic Park 3. Dave, ready to get into it?
Yeah.
As we ended on minute 36 of Jurassic Park 3, Grant had found Billy and warned him not to stay behind like that again. And if I lose you, it's just me and the damn tourists. As we open on minute 37, Grant walks away, smiling. Behind, Billy takes one last look at the nests, while fumbling with his camera bag trying to get the lid closed. At the 5-second mark, as they come down a slope into a clearing, they can see into the vast valley beyond, and structures. There appears to be a massive complex in the valley floor. Paul says I bet Eric's in there, and pushes past Grant and Billy, and says I bet my bottom dollar, and continues down the hill. As the rest of the group start down the hill, Billy asks Grant, "What do you think it is?" Jessica replies, "As far as I'm concerned, it's the Four Seasons." At the 23-second mark, as the ominous music begins to play, we cut down to the valley floor, as Grant and Co walk through some tall grass and trees before emerging in the car park of the Embryonic Administration building. They walk between abandoned vehicles and a blue InGen sign, covered in moss. Grant takes a look at one of the cars as he walks by, but continues on, seeing broken glass. Clearly these won't be driving anytime soon. At the 43-second mark, we cut to the front of the Embryonic Administration building as the group reach the top of the stairs and go through the front door and into the main lobby. As they come to the front reception desk, Paul yells Eric's name, but Amanda quickly tells him don't and shushes him. And as the minute ends, Paul's gaze falls onto the top of the reception desk and something he sees there. As we open on 37, Grant turns and starts to walk away from Billy, and he follows, continuing to play around with his camera bag. He takes one final look back at the nest before we get the screen change, and they seem to be now heading down a bit of a hill, and you can sort of hear those cries of the birds in the background, but it's not the raptors, unfortunately. It would have been good if that was them coming back and realising the eggs are missing. But we cut again as Grant stops, and we get to look down on a vast series of structures in the valley below beside a pretty large river that's flowing beside it as well. Paul pushes through the others, and so I bet Eric's in there, I bet my golden dollar. And he sort of starts rushing ahead, and Billy asks, "What do you think it is?" But only Jessica replies, "As far as I'm concerned, it's the Four Seasons," and rubs the back of his neck. And then we get one last shot as they all start to walk downhill, and we get to see those CG buildings, unfortunately, off in the distance.
I mean, they did a really good job of incorporating the visuals of the refurbished Embryonics Administration building into the CGI set and valley here. The valley itself was actually a location scouted for the first movie, and they returned to in the third now. It's interesting. Some of these buildings are very strange. Like, they have several large circular buildings. One notably just off to the left of, the rear left corner of the administration building itself. And there's another one that looks like that sandwiches. Well, there's two actually. It sandwiches like this large, almost looks like a barn. One side is a low, large circular building. I'm not even sure if it's a building. It looks almost like it's hollow on the inside. And then on the other side of the barn, there looks like a grain silo. And then,
so I'm just trying to bring up the photos so I can look at it as well.
And it's all very strange because it kind of looks industrial, but then it kind of looks like it's a mishmash of various architectural styles. There's also, like, in the very far corner close to the river, a building that almost looks like an air traffic control center, which is not necessary. They don't need something of that level.
Oh yeah.
They don't need something of that level in the facilities they have.
It's like a watchtower. I wonder if that's where the main kennels and holding pens might be.
I have no idea. It
very big.
It would be kind of small to have all the kennels there, though.
Yeah. Yeah, because as you said, like, there's that round building behind the Embryonics Administration that we see in a minute when they get down there. It's always reminded me of something from, like, Tomorrowland or something.
Yeah.
In Disney, like, especially when it's got that seemingly like a tram track or some sort of rail system around the top, looping it sort of like the rings of Saturn or something around the building.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting one thing too with the Embryonics Administration, the big concrete sort of block building behind its right-hand side that we see in a minute is sort of a little bit different to what we get. The CG model changes on that between here and there. It almost looks like a helipad on that far right as well, behind the barn. But yeah, you got that very large sort of industrial warehouse-looking thing beside it, and then like over the back, like a lot of these buildings have what seem to be like peaked triangular glass windows, like skylights on the roof.
Those ones I almost imagine were possibly where they were cloning the biological side of Jurassic Park. Because you remember Ellie identified a number of de-extinct plant species, and some of them being poisonous.
Yeah, because if you had like a clean room lab, I don't imagine you'd have big skylights like that above them. It'd be sort of a if you're going to have like solar radiation coming through the windows, making like plastic tubing go yellow and that sort of stuff.
No, well, what I was thinking was greenhouses. You don't necessarily need the greenhouse itself to be a clean room. You just kind of need the plants to grow, and what better place to have tropical plants growing than on a tropical island in a greenhouse,
Well, I'll give you two reasons why that might be a definite possibility. One, especially those four peaked, the structure in the middle, it seems to be overgrown the most. So if there is plants in there and broken windows, obviously they'd be growing up from inside to the roof. Also behind that looks like there's a very large water tower, which if you're going to have biologicals there, you're going to need water to feed them. So you'd have that sort of water reserve on standby.
And there's the building I kind of identified looked like a grain silo, but a water a water tower would make more sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Especially because it has that large, almost like antenna-looking structure that would have been the pump on the roof of it.
Yep. And of course, then you got the main building sort of that goes back across the valley there. I'm guessing that'd be sort of your main lab. But see, even it's got the windows in the bottom side of it. But in your buildings up near the rear, like one of them looks like it's definitely got a large radio antenna there as well, which obviously communication between there and the worker village. Note one thing, no sign of any fences of any kind here. We sort of discussed with the Lost World how the worker village was fenced, even though the evacuation was supposed to be something rushed and the animals released, but maybe something else is going on there. But here, you'd think you're going to have a lot more people employed in the lab than you would at the worker village. You're going to have a lot more people. They might not be outside as much as what they are at the worker village, but we don't see, even when Grant and that walk in here in a minute, we don't see any fencing of any type. I know the Lego game sort of brought in sort of just like chain link fence around the car park, but I'm not going to take that as canon. But the other thing too is, and it's the same in the novel, how they describe these buildings, and we see these buildings as being very large, all this glass involved, yet they seem to be almost impossible for anyone to see them from the sky. When the group go to the island in the Lost World in the novel, they sort of fly over the island first and circle before landing, and they don't see this massive structure or worker village in the clearing or anything like that. I suppose where the parachute landed, we wouldn't have seen this from the coast anyway. We start to get a bit of ominous music plays. We cut down to the valley floor as Grant moves through some ferns and emerges in a small clearing with a large building ahead of him and some abandoned cars scattered around. As you said before, it's the redressed operations building set now into the Embryonics Administration building. We got one of the cars, the first car we come past is a 1985 Suburban Silverado K10, which is painted in a dark green and has the yellow InGen logo on the door, which is the same sort of InGen logo as what we see here on the sign in front of the building.
Which is kind of disappointing because, I mean, why would they change the InGen logo, I mean, that's just kind of weird, I always thought.
Yeah, it's much like the discussion we've had before with the raptors, or raptors and some other animals as well, changing design from movie to movie. It seems that InGen logo wants to evolve with the raptors. Which we'd sort of hypothesised too, maybe different branches of InGen had a different version of the InGen logo, here being the labs. Later on when we see Eric, he's got a lab coat that's got the same InGen logo on too, and I think it's green. It's a green stitching on it.
I can't remember the color of the stitching. I
Yeah.
just remember the coat itself was very dirty.
Yeah. But we'll get to, because like the green for that, maybe the lab was blue. Then later when we get to the marina and that, we've got InGen construction equipment, and it's got the similar logo, another version of the logo again, so maybe InGen construction have a different InGen logo, but it might have all just been for sort of in-house stuff, for like the companies broke up in different branches and they've got their own logo, but it all comes under the InGen bioengineering umbrella or something. But also here we've got a FJ40 Land Cruiser short wheelbase. The door's missing, gone somewhere, and surprisingly running aftermarket tyres on it as well, but these would have been available in 93. There's also another Suburban far off to the left, which we don't really get to see a lot of. We get a quick glimpse of it here in a minute as Grant's walking past the green Suburban, and I think we get another quick shot of it later on when we leave the building too. But David, you were saying a few minutes ago that this is possibly the same Suburban that we've seen in the worker village. So maybe something on the back lot they've kept around just as a prop, abandoned vehicle prop.
Yeah, I was actually thinking more of the airstrip, because I mean the vehicle itself looks very. I mean, though it kind of is reminiscent of the I think what was it, like a Blazer or something that that Malcolm hid in. It's
he was in a Blazer, but the Raptor jumps up on that Suburban next to the kiln house before they leap down into the door. So
no, this is not the same Suburban. This one is green, and that Suburban had been like a fading yellow with like a yellowing white top to it.
Okay.
This is like a dark green color.
There's also a fourth vehicle here. It's tipped on its side, and sort of the chassis and undercarriage is pointing towards the camera, so there's not really any way to know what that is. Even a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff doesn't show the set dressed this well. It's always been either just before or just after filming's been done, where most of the jungle and that InGen sign's been removed as well, which is a shame. But also here you can notice there's several sort of streetlight poles dotted around the area as well, and there is one concept art image that they done a miniature for that I've been trying to find, which has a parking lot in front of the Embryonic Administration, which could hold, there's available spaces for about 30 cars, which seems like a lot bigger operation on Sawn than what we first imagined.
I always thought it was weird that they built it with a parking lot look, and then they built the actual set itself with like parking. Look like fallen parking lights and stuff like that, which is just weird because, I mean, I'm assuming that they probably wouldn't have had commuters. I mean, they would have probably had like a little caravan of daily workers going to and back and forth from barracks to their work site, but it's not like they kind of like drove all over the island. It was really just the three facilities, at least that we know of, that was primarily used for the island.
Yeah, it's not like if there was 30 employees, there was 30 cars on the island. It wasn't everyone. Okay, maybe global warming wasn't as big back then, but I don't think everyone had their own car. There was probably carpooling involved or something. But it's also weird that just we've seen air quotes worker village, and there's only been the boarding arrangements there in the boarding house. Yes, of course, it was supposed to be a 13 building thing to begin with, but here we are, sort of beyond the Lost World, and we know how many people the worker village probably could have housed. I can only assume that maybe there's some sort of quarters here for the lab techs and Wu when he's over here. I don't see him boarding with others, being the head geneticist.
It is possible. I just noticed a small reference here to the novel. that I had missed previously when I watched this movie is that in the second novel, there was a description of the the whole labs compound, and it was mentioned that the porticos that hang over the entrance to the lab and the compound and all that is slightly damaged and hanging downwards, like it was collapsing. And I just noticed that the right portico on this building here is collapsing, as it was described in the novel.
Yeah, half behind that tree there.
Yeah.
Yeah, also here too, you can see that InGen Biotech sign on the inside the lobby there from outside here too.
Mm-hmm. Well, this was done on the back lot, and then the rest of the jungle itself was superimposed behind it. They digitally erased the helipad, and then they added the mountains, the palm trees, all that stuff.
Yeah, but you got that CG again, that round building in the back.
Mm-hmm.
I do like how there's like vines and that hanging from that round trackway or whatever it is, rings that go around that main building.
Yeah, that is a weird thing. It looks like it has windows on the top of it there, like it was like you could access it from the inside, and it was an important building.
Yeah, maybe it's like the research offices or something. But yeah, it's impossible to tell. Yeah. It's all pure speculation at this point. But if you sort of look too, like you've got what would have been the first step up area on the operations building here. It's sort of, they've got a lot of plantings, a lot of ferns, both living and dead. Mm-hmm. Plantings in the front, which sort of hides the fact that the building itself's on a second story or second landing.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because I'd like to think that, because the building as it was designed originally for the Lost World had a walkway around the front here. And it was kind of cemented, it was like a U-shaped cement structure, but then they had the railings. And here they took down the railings, but personally, just me, I like to imagine that they had like shrubbery or some kind of like decorative plantings in that place during the heyday, and they just kind of became overgrown and unmanaged in the absence of any InGen workers there, you know?
It's also odd here we are 8-ish years later, and just how not so overgrown the plantings are on the front landing as well. Like even you got some small ferns in that there that sort of grow. Mm-hmm. You'd think that'd be as high as that palm tree at the front door now.
Well, the ferns don't really grow that tall. I suppose the closest analog we have in North America is the environment in the redwoods, where it does actually get cold in the winter, and the ferns kind of freeze over, but they always grow back the next year. But I don't think that species of fern gets that big in the first place. I think they're just like normal 6-foot fronds that wouldn't get much bigger than they are as they are now.
Yeah. I suppose quickly, just going back to the whole car park thing here too, you can sort of see how flat and smooth the surface is. Definitely by the suburban door and that, where it just seems to have leaves scattered on the ground, which makes sense if this was a asphalted or a blacktop car parking area to begin with. It would have taken a while for cracks to start to appear, and this elephant grass looking stuff sort of grow up through the cracks, or any dirt that had been built up on top of it. But as I said before, so the concrete blocky structure to the right of the Embryonic Administration building isn't as round as what it looked like from up above. It's also got the number 21 stenciled on it, and if you look really carefully, it's got the InGen logo on the outside wall of it as well. So it almost looks like a cooling tower or something, especially with that chimney on top of it.
It's strange because it's right over the walkway that connects the administration building to the rest of the laboratory compound there, where we'll see in the next couple minutes here the machinery and the stuff where they do to quote unquote play God.
Yeah, well, you do see that little single-story structure that sort of spans a gap here. You don't see the side of that big warehouse. And the only other man-made thing, I suppose, is that tower in the background, which might be that radio tower we've seen before. It might be a tower on top of the watchtower, like a small.
No, that's I think part of one of the back structures that we see. It's part of one of the furthest back structures. There looks like there's a large radio tower. In the very far backmost building.
Yeah, and it's sort of odd too. Like in that shot before, looking down, all the structures were above the tree line. Where here you can see the tree line above the Embryonics Administration, behind it anyway, and there's no other signs of roofs or those big warehouse type buildings behind.
Especially because some of these structures are 2-3 story size structures, you know?
Yeah. Also, as they're walking in here, none of them look wet. The jungle rivers on the approach side to the lab, they would have to go through that river to get to this car park.
I was thinking the same thing. I mean, especially because they're standing on the top of the mountain, and obviously rivers don't go uphill. My only thinking is possibly the river goes the other way. It goes into the valley from the hill they're standing on, and so they didn't actually ever have to cross the river.
Well, they were before a stream before. That might have come to the end of that hill and dropped down waterfall-like to the valley floor and then keep on going that way. Yeah, that's more than possible. But the group sort of walks forward amongst the buildings, and we get Grant take a bit of a look through the Suburban as he passes, and we can see the windows have been pushed out. We'll get to a little bit more to that in the script, but it's also here they walk past the Suburban, and that's when you can see the other one behind them off in the distance. But we don't get a POV as they walk up the stairs, unfortunately, like in The Lost World. Here we got a side shot as they get to climb the steps to the front door, and you can see those massive steel beams that sort of take place of the concrete pillars the operations building had. I don't know why so many people confuse the two. Yes, it's sort of similar, but it's not in a way. I think it might be just from people that don't watch the films enough.
Yeah, that's what I'd chalk it up as, just people not paying attention, really.
Those are the ones that still say Jurassic Park shouldn't have had sequels. But as you were saying before, with that sort of walkway around the front here, you can clearly see you can walk, and the railing's still here on this top deck. You walk around the outside of the building here as well. We're following them into the building as they pass through the front double glass doors. No egg motif on these doors, unfortunately.
No, as I was going to say, there's no... I mean, the building is distinctly very different from what had originally been, and I think the porticos were actually somewhat less stable than the buildings, how the building had originally been built, because the building hadn't been built with that design in mind, so it was actually one of the first things to start falling off the building when it started falling apart.
I suppose before we leave that behind, do you have any theories as to why it might be designed like that? Are they sort of wind or storm shutters, or just a design choice?
Yeah, I just chalk it up to design choice. I've heard that theories before. They're storm shutters, but I mean, they do kind of look like shutters, but I doubt that's the purpose. I've heard a lot of people say or question the idea, or bring up the idea that the shutters can kind of close and become like a barrier for the front of the building, but that just seems unlikely to me. If we look at the way that it's designed, it's bolted down pretty toughly, or at least it's meant to give the impression that it is.
Well, that sort of goes back to the whole operations building design. I think I mentioned during those minutes where it looked like those front pillars were big hydraulic rams. They could just lift the roof up, which of course no. But Yeah, and it also seems weird. Why would you have sort of storm shutters on the front of the Embryonics Administration building, which is only, as we see, a couple of offices and a lobby, um, and not on your more important buildings like your research buildings or your incubation rooms or your hatchery, or even though we don't get a good look at those buildings, you can clearly see the structure's different from the rest of the buildings in the area. But also, I've held off calling it compound. I'm pretty sure definition of compound is it needs to have a fence around it. Or can you have a compound as just a series of buildings closely grouped
Yeah, that's
together?
what I always kind of assumed a compound was. Is like it was just a kind of like a network of buildings built together and meant to like it's the idea is that it's somewhat isolated, but it doesn't need to be fenced.
Okay. Alright, we'll call it... It's described as a lab compound, the InGen compound, so...
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was just holding off on that.
That was one thing though, is that I know Jurassicpedia calls it the Laboratory Embryonics and Labs compound, but but I always kind of had a problem with that title, and I was always told, oh, not really need to change it. It doesn't really matter, but it's not the Embryonics and Administration. It's the Embryonics Administration. The building they walk into is the administration office. It's like a doctor's waiting office where you sit while you're waiting to talk to Wu or Hammond or whoever you're there to talk to. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And although we don't see it in the film, in the script and the novel, it's definitely described a lot like in the Lost World in the novel, where it's got the waiting room, the plush couches that have been destroyed by animals, and vines retaking everything over. So,
well, the operations center in the Lost World is a lot like that. You see these plush couches that had been shredded open, and the stuffing is kind of poking out of the couch filling.
yeah.
And you have about 3 sets of these chairs in the building, in the lobby there itself.
Yeah. And it makes more sense here being the lab building, because if you're going to have people come in, you're going to have other people sort of needing to get there from different areas of the lab, needing the decontamination and everything else, so people might have to wait. But in the worker village, maybe not so much, because that's where operations are done. Like, if people are coming in via chopper, they're landing on the building, the roof above you. There's only 4 or 5 officers maybe in that building at all, and the fact that there's a lobby in both these sort of buildings has me thinking, or question it sometimes. Just it's not like you're walking into the mechanic shop and have to sit there while someone comes to tend to you, or as you said, the doctors or something. It's like you're there for a very specific reason. You wouldn't get to the island unless someone knew you were coming. So you'd think you'd be met at the helicopter or all that sort of thing. So it's like even here when we get to this lab, we get to the like the office, the lobby console here. That's not what you call that. Reception desk. That's what it is. Yeah. Like here, the same with the operations building. You got 3 to 4 computers in this reception desk. Like, is there secretaries sitting here just waiting around for a phone call? But as they do walk into the lobby here, it's great, as we were talking before, about how the vines and jungle taking back over. Just the crunch, the footsteps walking through the dead leaves on the ground. And we get a look through the interior that we couldn't see in the Lost World, which here is pretty much just all open, and it looks like there's some like glass doors, like clean room doors at the end going into a glass corridor, sort of.
I think it's interesting the architecture here in this side of this building. It never spoke 90s to me. It always spoke very kind of like mid-2000s. Like mid 2010s, like 2001. Like this was furniture they pulled off a showroom floor in 2001.
Yeah.
Had the art department dirty it up and then stuck it on set.
Yeah.
Because the lines, the way that it was, like the glass doors, for example, in the worker village we had that motif, the egg motif, and the same in the visitor center doors for Jurassic Park. Here, it's all kind of like that minimalist industrialist look that was popular in the early 2000s.
Mm.
I remember my high school, or not my junior high school, that was built in 2003, or no, it was built in the early 2000s, or I'm sorry, the 20, I guess you could call it the 2000s, but it was built in the early 2000s and then opened in 2003, and it was styled very, very much like this, with the clean lines and metallic surfaces, and it just never spoke 90s to me. It always seemed very early 2000s.
Well, and that's, yeah, and to touch back on design and architecture again, it's like the whole Jurassic Park and The Lost World was just that sort of, that fortified concrete steel sort of thing, where here it's a lot more glass and just seems to go completely different architectural design for the most part. Like even this desk, like this sweeping sort of U-shaped desk, a lot of sort of silver and curves on it, where like the one in The Lost World was a lot more blocky, and the monitors were sitting on top of the reception desk, where here they're sunk in very I'll say Star Trek like, but just a lot more sleeker.
And even the telephone itself doesn't. I mean, I remember the telephone we had in the 90s, and this seems much blockier, more 2000s like.
I was still using a rotary phone in the 90s.
Well, my parents had the phones with the tail hanging from the wall, and it was thick. It had the numbers on the keypad, but then we also had another phone in the garage that was like this, but without like all the specialty numbers on it. It didn't have a button to hold the call or nothing like that. Yeah, but the actual phone, the earpiece and the mouthpiece itself was much more curved, and this seems much more blocky, like what you saw more in the later 90s and even the early 2000s. Not so much in the early 90s, late 80s, when this would have been used.
I'll try and do some research for next minute, but even the obviously being sort of like a corporate phone, having all the obviously different lines and that with all the different buttons, like holding line 1 and everything else, like having this whole area sort of wired up, it sort of makes me remember back to even just comparing it to the phones in the control room that Arnold's got to try and call the mainland, and that, and I don't think they look the same.
No.
Where you think if you spend all your money on a high-tech park, then your lab would probably have the same. Let's do a group deal and get 1,000 of these telephones instead of 2.
Well, if you look at the phone of that in that scene, it's like as I described, it's kind of curved and more early 90s. It's not this early 2000s style.
That's right. I'll see what I can research, and we'll get to the phone next minute. Before we end here, there's also, when they walk in the building, there's a large poster on the wall, and I've been racking my brain over this for a very long time.